Welcome and thank you for tuning in today, because we're about to talk about something that feels extremely relevant no matter what the world looks like, especially if we ever find ourselves in situations where normal comforts and support systems have crumbled or become unreliable. And although nobody likes to think about emergencies, it's always better to understand what might lurk beneath the surface of our fellow human beings when times get tough. So let me start by saying that even if you never face a catastrophic crisis in your entire life, having insight into the darker side of human nature can still help you navigate your everyday relationships and interactions. And if you're here, chances are you want to be prepared and stay ahead of the curve. So let's dive into this eye-opening discussion about 5 dangerous types of people you may encounter if the going ever gets rough. Though in truth, these traits can be found even when society is functioning normally. Before we begin, allow me to give you a simple heads up so you know what to expect. We're going to explore how certain kinds of people become threats to your well-being, whether it's due to raw desperation, hidden agendas, manipulative streaks, addictions, or downright thirst for power. We'll be translating these insights into a more casual, human-focused conversation so you'll have no trouble understanding what to look out for. Because while everyone's always talking about storing food and water, what often gets overlooked in preparedness circles is the whole psychological aspect of surviving alongside unpredictable people. The truth is that human beings can shift drastically under stress, so we need to know the difference between a normal person who's just having a hard time and someone who's crossed the line into a real threat. Take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss future videos where we dive into more crucial topics that can make all the difference in your life. Because I believe sharing this information can help build communities that thrive on mutual support and awareness instead of fear. Stick around and let's break down these 5 categories of dangerous people with real talk, practical examples, and strategies for staying safe. Because at the end of the day, knowing how to manage risk is at least as important as any stockpile you might have. Let's jump into it. Let's start with the group that can appear practically overnight when systems go down. Store shelves empty out, and folks realize they're on their own with limited or no resources. I'm talking about those who have hit the edge of survival and are fueled by desperation. Because once a person's basic needs like food, water, or protection aren't met, they can morph from a mild-mannered neighbor into someone who's willing to break down your door or hold you at gunpoint just to get a bag of rice. What makes them so dangerous is that they're not driven by malice or hatred, but by raw necessity. Whenever someone feels they have nothing left to lose, they might engage in extremely reckless and potentially violent behavior because they're backed into a corner by their own fears and hunger. It's important to realize that a lot of people in desperate situations never thought they would do anything illegal, immoral, or downright savage. But once the stress levels soar and their minds switch into survival mode, the normal constraints of society can vanish, especially if they truly believe there are no more consequences, no more law enforcement, or no more social stigma to hold them back. So if they see you with something they lack, whether it's a well-stocked pantry, a water source, or even just a better sense of security, they might reason that they have no choice but to take it. In an everyday world with functional authorities, that's less likely because the fear of jail is real. But in a collapse scenario or a severe emergency, that fear might fade quickly, making them unpredictable and hard to negotiate with. When it comes to signs that someone might be slipping into desperation mode, you'll often notice an abrupt change in demeanor, a frenzied kind of speech, maybe a constant mention of running out of food, or someone who starts asking you the same questions again and again, like whether you have more than you need or if you can spare supplies. If they're desperate and hungry, you might also notice them rummaging through trash, snatching at any opportunity, or hanging around your property in suspicious ways. Sometimes they'll ask for help in a direct manner, practically pleading. But if that request repeatedly goes unanswered, or if their situation becomes even more dire, they might eventually drop the polite approach and go full force for your supplies, especially if they think you're withholding more than what you're admitting. This can be a really tough situation because I'm sure most of us want to help people who are struggling, and there's nothing inherently evil about a desperate person's reasons for acting out. But from a security standpoint, you have to evaluate how to assist safely, if at all. Some folks choose to keep hidden storage or decoy supplies that can be offered without exposing the entire stockpile. That way, if a desperate individual confronts you, you have something to give them that might diffuse the situation, but they never see the larger stash. It can buy you breathing room, or at least shift their attention onto the initial offering. If you're part of a community group or small survival network, you might discuss how to distribute modest help in a manner that doesn't create a stampede of other desperate individuals. Because once word gets out that you're giving things away, your risk can multiply. So it's a delicate balancing act. If you decide not to assist, or if you physically can't provide enough to solve their problem, you need to keep a watchful eye. Someone who's hungry or panicked doesn't necessarily get deterred by locked doors or basic fences, so you might want to reinforce entry points to your home, keep your movements discreet, and appear as though you're on the same level as everyone else so you don't become the target of envy and desperation. The truth is that broadcasting your abundance in an environment where people have next to nothing can paint a giant bullseye on your back, which is why so many preparedness-minded folks say to keep your head down, maintain operational security, and not brag about what you have. Because if a neighbor or an acquaintance who's falling into desperation sees your riches, they might switch from neighborly mode to survival mode in an instant. Another angle to consider is that desperation often pushes people to gather in groups. So it's not always just one lone individual who's suffering. You might encounter a small pack of folks, maybe family members, neighbors, or even strangers who have banded together because they're all in the same boat. That can magnify the threat, since a group that's collectively desperate can be harder to deal with than a single person. And a group can escalate more quickly if they perceive you as hoarding resources that should be shared. This is why so many preparedness guides talk about coordinating with trusted individuals well in advance, setting up mutual aid agreements, and figuring out how you might handle crises together as a cohesive community, rather than letting random desperation run wild. If you can think ahead, you can hopefully prevent the worst kind of tension that leads to chaos. With that in mind, it's not always about turning people away. Sometimes desperate individuals can be integrated into a safer structure if they see a path to get their needs met without resorting to violence. But that usually means you need some sort of group leadership or system in place to regulate resource distribution. Without that, random compassion might attract more desperation than you can handle, especially if you're alone or have limited manpower. In the end, it comes down to being realistic about your security, your actual resource levels, and your willingness to accept risk in exchange for helping somebody. If you do find a workable balance, you might prevent someone from going down a violent path, which is a huge win. If not, you've got to be ready with stronger protective measures. There's a lot more that could be said, but let's shift gears and talk about those who might not be outwardly desperate but pose a more insidious threat. Because not everyone who's dangerous is obviously stressed out or lacking in resources. Some folks are dangerous because they operate with cunning, stealth, and a desire to manipulate everyone around them. When resources get scarce or emotions run high, you'll sometimes see a new figure emerge. The one who's adept at stirring the pot, planting rumors, and turning people against one another. That's the manipulator. And they can come across as charming, helpful, or even the sweetest person you've ever met, at least on the surface. But behind that pleasant facade, they're pulling strings, gathering information, and playing mind games to get what they want, whether that's safety, a sense of control, or even something as simple as personal gain at the expense of others. Now, this type of person can be tough to detect because they often avoid confrontation in a direct sense. Instead, they prefer subtle conversations where they can say, "Oh, did you hear that so-and-so might be hiding food? Or did you notice how this other person has been acting suspiciously?" And once the seeds of doubt are planted, the manipulator steps back and lets the tension grow on its own. One of the most unsettling aspects about the manipulator is that they can break a group from within, no matter how strong that group appears, if they identify fault lines or hidden disagreements and start pressing on those weaknesses. We see it in normal, everyday settings like workplaces or social groups where one person fosters conflict by whispering rumors or putting on a fake smile while telling lies behind someone's back. It can be devastating in a crisis scenario where trust is already fragile. If you're in a survival group or just trying to keep your household afloat, having someone so paranoia can undermine all those strong relationships you thought were bulletproof, and it can quickly turn your circle into a hotbed of suspicions and infighting. One day, You might catch on that the manipulator has been telling different stories to everyone behind the scenes. Maybe they told you that a particular neighbor had stolen supplies. But then, you find out they told that same neighbor you were the one who had done something sneaky. With tensions already high, it can be easy to believe the worst about people you thought you knew, especially if the manipulator is good at feigning concern, saying things like, "Oh, I don't want to upset you, but I have to warn you that your friend is plotting something." That quiet misdirection can wreak havoc and spark chaos far worse than any lone, desperate individual who's just out for your food. Because once your group is fractured and trust is gone, it's basically open season for the manipulator to step in and exploit the cracks. So how do you deal with a manipulator in a casual, day-to-day sense, or in a crisis? The first step is to promote open communication among the people you trust. If someone comes to you with a rumor or a complaint about a third person, your immediate response should be, "Let's go talk to them together about this," so there's no miscommunication. The manipulator typically hates direct, transparent dialogue, because that's where the illusions they've crafted can unravel. If they say, "Oh no, you can't say anything or it'll ruin everything," it might be a sign that they're intentionally creating secrecy to keep people separated. By pushing for group discussions, you cut off that secrecy and make it much harder for them to operate in the shadows. It's also a good idea to keep notes or some informal log about important events or decisions. Because when the manipulator tries to twist the narrative, you can look back at these records and say, "Actually, that's not how it went down." If you have a written record of who agreed to what or who was present during which conversation, it becomes a lot easier to verify the truth, and the manipulator's lies can get exposed. This can be awkward in a relaxed environment, but in a crisis scenario, it can literally be the difference between a functioning group and an imploding group. When you're deciding how to confront a suspected manipulator, you should weigh the fact that direct confrontation can trigger them to double down and accuse you of being the manipulator yourself. Sometimes the most effective route is to quietly gather evidence, share it with trusted allies, and then collectively address the manipulator's behavior in a united front. This approach prevents them from isolating you or retaliating by controlling the narrative. If, in the end, they can't be reformed or reined in, you might face a difficult decision about whether to remove them from your circle altogether. In less extreme situations, maybe you set boundaries or keep them away from sensitive information or high-level decisions so their capacity to sow discord is limited. That can be enough if you're not in a life-and-death scenario. What makes manipulators truly scary in a collapse is that while you're busy dealing with external threats, looters, desperate people, resource scarcity, they can sabotage you from within without even needing to pick up a weapon, and that might be the hardest threat to guard against. Reminding your group to stay unified, trust but verify, and always return to an open forum for discussion might feel tedious. But it's a small price to pay compared to the devastation a manipulator can cause if left unchecked. Now let's pivot to the person who may act out in a completely different yet equally damaging way, the one whose addiction defines their actions. If you've ever seen someone going through withdrawal, you know it can be incredibly intense, both physically and emotionally. Under normal conditions, society has avenues for people who are addicted to certain substances or behaviors, whether it's rehab programs, medical support, or even a consistent supply from a pharmacy or a dealer that keeps them somewhat functional. But in a crisis, those avenues may vanish. Pharmacies shut down, drug routes get disrupted, and even alcohol might become a luxury no one can get their hands on. When that happens, someone with a strong dependency can go from being an average person you barely notice to a panicked, unpredictable individual who will do almost anything to fix their craving or alleviate withdrawal symptoms. It's an unfortunate truth that if you're dealing with an addict in a survival scenario, you're not just dealing with that person's conscious personality. You're dealing with a chemical hold that might overshadow every moral or logical consideration they once had. Maybe they were a good friend or a kind neighbor, but now their addiction has them lying, stealing, or even threatening violence just to secure the next pill, the next drink, or whatever substance they rely on. The real tragedy is that this desperation can lead them into confrontations that put your safety at risk. They might rummage through medicine cabinets looking for prescription drugs or break into locked storage hoping to find anything that can help with their cravings. On top of that, in a bigger meltdown scenario, the stress can push someone who was sober into relapse. which amplifies the chaos if they suddenly can't get what they need. If you're trying to keep your group or your household stable, it can be especially challenging if someone within your circle starts to experience severe withdrawals. The physical side effects can include tremors, nausea, sweats, insomnia, and even seizures, depending on the substance, while the mental side might manifest in paranoia, rage, or intense depression. An addicted individual might begin to blame others for their pain, lash out physically, or become manipulative to get the medication they think will help them function normally. Before you know it, you might realize your best friend has taken your entire first aid kit in the hopes of finding something to ease their suffering, or they might walk off with vital painkillers that were meant for legitimate injuries, leaving the rest of the group vulnerable. So how can you handle it? If there's any possible medical help or professional advice available, like a doctor, nurse, or pharmacist who knows how to manage withdrawal, that's the ideal. Tapering off or safely detoxing can reduce the risk of violent outbursts or severe complications. But in a scenario where professional help isn't available, you might have to make some tough choices. Some people choose to stash away medications specifically for these situations, like anti-anxiety meds or other supportive prescriptions that can mitigate the harshest withdrawal phases. That said, you also have to realize that controlling access to these meds is crucial, because if the addicted person knows you have them, they may focus their entire energy on getting them, with or without your cooperation. Limiting who knows what kind of supplies you have is often the best first step. If the addicted person is in your close network, you probably can't hide it for long, but you can keep the supplies locked and only administer them in small, supervised doses to prevent them from taking an entire bottle at once. This approach requires trust and vigilance, but it can help you manage the situation without letting it spiral out of control. If you're not related or closely bonded to this person, you might decide it's too risky to keep them around if they show signs of aggression or repeated theft. But sometimes people will choose to help anyway out of compassion or practical necessity, especially if that person has other valuable skills that the group needs. A big part of your success in dealing with this scenario is to maintain a layered security system. Even in non-crisis life, people lock up narcotics in secure cabinets for a reason. In a collapse scenario, it's even more important. You might consider using multiple hiding spots, such that even if the addicted individual finds one stash, they don't find everything. The idea is that you keep your essential medical supplies out of direct reach and only bring them out under controlled conditions. Because let's face it, once they're gone, they're gone. And not only have you lost a valuable resource, you may have turned this individual into a ticking time bomb if they end up taking everything at once or trading it away for something that isn't in the group's best interest. With that said, the addict isn't the only person who might cause problems by targeting or controlling resources. There's another type that thrives on control for its own sake. Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from the person who's hungry or addicted. It comes from the individual who wants to run the entire show. This is the power-hungry personality. Someone who sees chaos or fear as an opportunity to seize control over others. They might paint themselves as a benevolent protector or a decisive leader who's only stepping up because the situation requires strong guidance. But once they have a foothold, they may impose rules that disproportionately benefit them. And they might even punish anyone who questions their authority. This can manifest in different ways, from small-scale groups, with a self-appointed leader who starts micromanaging every aspect of life, to entire communities or neighborhoods that fall under the sway of a self-styled warlord if the official government is slow to respond. What makes the power-hungry person especially tricky is that they can be very charismatic or convincing in the early stages. They'll talk about safety and order and how they can restore some sense of normalcy. Folks who are scared or unsure might rally behind them because, hey, it's better than feeling completely unprotected. And by the time people realize this new leader is exploiting them or building up their own private militia, it can be too late to easily remove them from power. And once they have that sense of ownership, they might start hoarding resources, controlling who gets what, and demanding loyalty in ways that turn your community into something oppressive. This can happen in small enclaves or big ones, but the result is a creeping sense that you're no longer free to do what's best for you and your family, because the so-called leader is holding all the cards. If you notice warning signs like someone insisting that all food, medicine, or weapons be stored under their exclusive watch, or them pushing for curfews, punishments, or constant loyalty checks. That's when you want to carefully assess whether you can either reform that dynamic or walk away before it spirals out of your control. Confronting a power-hungry individual can be dangerous if they've already built up a following or armed themselves with the best gear, because they'll be very defensive about their status. In fact, they may label anyone who questions them as a traitor or an enemy, which is a common tactic used by dictators big and small throughout history. The best-case scenario is to prevent that person from gaining excessive influence in the first place by championing group decisions, rotating leadership roles, and ensuring that the community remains transparent about resource allocation. If you're too late for that, and they already have an iron grip, you may need to gather a covert coalition of people who share your concerns. Putting your heads together can let you either negotiate from a position of strength or plan your exit strategy if it appears you can't unify enough people to overturn this regime. Yes, that sounds dramatic, but history and real-world crises show that these mini-dictators can and do pop up. If you have a safe place to go and resources to sustain you there, it can be better to leave than to live under oppression, but that depends on the scale of the crisis and how feasible travel is. If you must stay put, try to set boundaries, keep your relationships with others strong, and stay alert to any changes in the power structure that might let you and your allies push back or negotiate for better conditions. The key is to keep your eyes open from the start of an emergency. The folks who are truly interested in helping the group will welcome shared leadership, clear channels of communication, and a sense of unity. The ones who want to dominate will eventually reveal it through attempts at consolidating authority. If you see it, don't ignore it, because power-hungry people typically only ramp up their behavior over time, especially if they taste success early on. Now, speaking of cunning, there's a final type who can be a real wild card. Picture this scenario. A lone traveler shows up at your gate, looking exhausted, weak, and completely out of options, and naturally, your heartstrings are tugged. You invite them inside, offer them a meal, maybe a safe place to sleep, because you're a compassionate person who believes in helping others. But before you know it, supplies start going missing. Little bits of tension pop up, and some of your group members suspect sabotage. Eventually, you realize that this newcomer was never really the vulnerable stranger they pretended to be. Maybe they had a hidden weapon, or they were collecting intel for a larger band of raiders, or maybe they just wanted to swipe your valuables and disappear in the night. That's the pretender, and they can be incredibly dangerous because they use deception as their main weapon, weaving a sob story that gets you to lower your guard. You might wonder, why would someone go to such lengths instead of just using brute force like a desperate thief might? Well, for starters, it's often less risky. If they can trick you into welcoming them, they don't have to fight or face immediate confrontation. They can learn where you store your resources, figure out your routines, and test your defenses. They can also gauge group dynamics, noticing who's the real decision maker, who might be easily manipulated, and who's already suspicious. The scariest part is that the pretender's timeline can vary. Some might just steal a few items at their first opportunity. Others might stick around for a while, slowly earning your trust, acting like a team player, and maybe even offering small favors or a skill set to appear useful. Then, once the moment is right, they'll vanish with your best gear, or open the back door for a raiding party, or commit an act of violence that no one expected from such a seemingly meek individual. It's unsettling, but the best defense here is to adopt a policy of gradual trust. There's nothing wrong with helping strangers if that's your chosen moral stance, but if you do, you might want to keep them at an arm's length initially. That means giving them modest tasks that prove their intentions, watching how they handle basic responsibilities, and never revealing all your secrets early on. For example, if they say they're great at carpentry, let them fix a small, relatively unimportant structure. See how they interact with the group and ask follow-up questions about their story to see if they remain consistent. You can also do discreet background checks by quietly inquiring if anyone else has heard of them, or if their story matches any rumors going around. If you live in a smaller community, there might be someone who recognizes them or knows a detail that contradicts their claims. And if the pretender reacts very defensively or tries to rush deeper into your circle without a normal period of observation, that could be a red flag that they're up to something. You can also structure your operations so that newcomers don't get immediate access to sensitive areas. Keep your food stores, weapons, or communication equipment in a secure area that only trusted long-term members can enter, at least until the new person has proven themselves over time. This might sound harsh, but it's often safer than throwing open the doors to everything you have just because someone has a good sob story. And remember that the pretender might come in pairs or small groups that pretend not to know each other, so be cautious about cross-referencing their stories if you see suspicious coincidences. The best approach is to remain compassionate if you wish, but also verify everything you can. Genuine people who truly need help will usually understand the need for precaution in chaotic times. People with malicious intent might bristle at those boundaries or try to bypass them. That's a huge clue about their real motives. If you do discover a betrayal or confirm that someone isn't who they say they are, respond decisively but calmly. Alert your group so that this person can't spin the narrative. Present any evidence you have and make sure you have safety measures in place if the pretender gets violent or tries to slip away and bring back reinforcements. Sometimes, a quick decision to expel them is enough, but if they have critical intel about your group, you might need to immediately change your security protocols, shift your supplies, or even relocate if that's an option. It can feel like a lot of hassle, but it's better than facing an ambush because the pretender sold you out to a more formidable group. By keeping your guard up and taking a measured approach, you make yourself a much less appealing target for this kind of infiltration. There you have it. The desperate, the manipulator, the addict, the power-hungry, and the pretender. Each of these 5 categories represents a unique threat dynamic that you could encounter in a crisis, or possibly even in everyday life, if circumstances line up just right. And as you can tell, it's about more than just locking your doors or stashing food. It's about understanding who might be knocking at that door, and what their motivations or hidden agendas might be. The more you educate yourself on these types of behaviors, the more you can notice subtle changes that signal something is off. Whether it's your neighbor's sudden obsession with your pantry, the coworker who keeps gossiping to turn people against each other, or a new friend who seems too good to be true. While none of this is meant to turn you into a cold-hearted person or make you suspicious of every human being you meet, a bit of caution can go a long way. And if you find yourself in a real emergency situation, these insights might literally save your life. Being ready isn't just about stockpiling resources. It's also about knowing how to handle different personalities under stress, because crises tend to magnify what's already inside people. A decent person might become even more caring and cooperative, but a manipulative or power-hungry type might take advantage of the chaos to fulfill their hidden ambitions. In simpler terms, knowledge about human nature and social dynamics is as important as having enough canned food to last a month. If you found value in this discussion, go ahead and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below telling me which type of person you think is the biggest threat, or maybe which one you've encountered in your own life experiences. Because I've heard plenty of stories from viewers who realized, wait a minute, that coworker or neighbor was actually playing manipulator all along. Hearing from you also helps build a sense of community around these topics. And that's what we're all about, sharing experiences, tips, and real talk so that we can all move forward with clarity. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so we can keep the conversation going. We've got more topics lined up that will help you refine your preparedness strategies and sharpen your understanding of human behavior under stress, which is something you really can't have too much knowledge about. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this exploration of 5 dangerous types of people. The goal here wasn't to alarm you, but to empower you with strategies and examples so you can handle them if they ever come into your life, especially in a high-pressure scenario. The truth is, not everyone is out to get you, but enough people are willing to cross moral lines under the right circumstances that you need to stay vigilant and plan accordingly. Be safe, stay prepared, and remember that true resilience involves both practical skills and a keen understanding of how people behave when the normal rules fade away. Until next time, take care, and I'll catch you in the next video.